I'm Susan Regan, your host of Connecticut Valley Views. And today my guest is Joe Markley. He is a Connecticut politician who was a member of the Connecticut State Senate, representing the 16th State Senate District from 2011 to 2019. He was the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor for Connecticut on the general election ticket with gubernatorial candidate Bob Stefanowski in 2018. So, Joe, you're very well respected for your rational and rather candid observations on the political scene and culture in Connecticut. So, having said that, today's interview will center focus on key primary event outcomes for the primary that we just completed. And my first question is, can you share your personal endorsements that you did for the primary?
Yes, I was approached by two old friends. One was Peter Lumage, who I've known for a dozen years and always respected, always got along with. I know he's a true believer for U.S. Senate. And Brock Weber, another young man that I've known for quite a while, for Secretary of State. So I was 0 for 2 as far as it goes. I don't worry much, Susan, about whether I'm going with the winner or not. Right. My interest is in being with somebody that I'm comfortable with. Yes. I will say that in both those cases, they were the first people that asked me, and at the point at which they asked me, I wasn't really sure that other people would get involved. And in both cases, not only did other candidates come into the race, but candidates that I also knew well. I had a very good relationship with Leora Levy, and not bad with Themis Claridis too. And I felt Leora had a lot to offer as a candidate. And Dom Rapini and Terry Wood is a woman that I worked with very closely in the legislature. So I would say that in all cases, there were multiple people who I liked running, but the ones I was with were Peter and Brock. And once I go with them, I go with them. Yes,
right. All right, well, let's just talk generally speaking about Secretary of State. How do you feel that Dominic Rapini is going to fare against Stephanie Thomas? You think he has a good chance of capturing that?
You know, I think that something people have to realize about the under ticket is, by and large, it kind of runs level, and it runs somewhere relative to the top of the ticket. So if you look at the last few elections, recently, the whole ticket has been running closer together. When John Rowland was governor in the Jody Rell race, they won easily, but the under ticket ran maybe 10 points behind them, wasn't particularly close. But in the two Foley races and in Stefanowski's race last time, the under ticket was relatively close to the governor's race. What that means, I guess what that means is two things. Number one, unless our gubernatorial candidate does well, I don't think the under-ticket members are likely to win on their own. I don't see Stefanowski losing and Dom Rapini winning, probably. And the second thing I'd say is I don't think that one candidate on the under-ticket is likely to do a tremendous amount better than another. That's not to say that the positions aren't important, but that the candidates and the campaigns may not be quite as important as people think. And a lot of argument, for instance, especially in the Secretary of State race, about who would be the strongest candidate. I don't think that's the way to look at it. I do think that the thing to do is to say who'd be the best Secretary of State. What Dom Rapini has is a real record on voter integrity. He's been the leader of Fight Voter Fraud Connecticut. And he'll make it an issue. And I think it's a good issue. And I think it's an issue that we need to run on. And it's something, part of the campaign is not simply trying to win, but it's also trying to get a message out. And I think Dom's message on voter integrity and having good voter ID laws and all of that is a very important thing to have someone talking about.
Well, he ran a very strong race. He put a lot of effort, a lot of time. I think Terry started a little bit late. I did meet her along the way at Republican Town Committee meetings. I think she was very good. She had some very good mailers, and I'm not usually very fond of mailers. People tend to throw those out. You know, they take a quick look and then they toss them out. But she had some very strong messages on those mailers, and I think she hit all the points. But Dominic started early. I think that he, as you said, had a very he had his own strong message and he had a way of selling it because he is a salesman. And I think that's what we need at this point, is that salesman style to prove that I can actually carry the football over the line. And I think that's what held through for him.
I'll say one other thing about Dom that I have great respect for. He ran for the U.S. Senate 4 years ago and lost the convention and then lost a primary to Matt Corey. And I know he was very disappointed. He tried very hard, and I feel in some ways he thought maybe he had the stronger campaign. But he didn't go away. He got right back at it. He stayed active all these years, and he came back around. And I was very glad to see that Dom didn't feel like, oh, well, if they don't want me, then I don't want them. But Dom looked for an opportunity to be useful. He found it in this voter integrity project, and that's led him into this nomination.
Very good. All right. Now I have a question to ask you because I think it's something that we can parallel. Since you ran in 2018 on the ticket as lieutenant governor, do you believe that Laura Devlin was the right choice for Bob to identify as his running mate?
I think she made a lot of sense given what they were looking for. I think they wanted a candidate out of Fairfield County. They want to make sure they get as many votes out of there as they can. I think they wanted a woman to have gender balance on the ticket. And I think Laura Devlin, I didn't know her well in the legislature, although we served together. But there's no question she's a very intelligent, capable woman. And she made a very good impression during the anti-tolls effort. She and Henry Martin, who were the ranking members, the lead Republicans on the Transportation Committee, went around the state and made presentations. And she's well-spoken. She's level-headed. I think she comes across like a serious person. I prefer somebody who was a little more conservative. I think especially on, it's a difficult thing within the Republican Party on an issue like abortion, for instance, because either way you go, there's going to be people mad at you. But she's been very much on the pro-choice side, and also on the Second Amendment issues. I think she's cast some votes that I wouldn't have cast, but it's not a reason, from my point of view, not to support that ticket.
I looked at her as a choice that was good for the ticket for Bob's stance on things, but I'm sensing that the voters, the electorate, would have liked to have seen someone more from their ranks of we the people. And
well, yeah,
that you have to look at who's going to make the actual choice in the end.
This comes around to something I think we talked about the last time we talked a couple of years ago now, which is the idea that the way to win the election is to try to have a centrist. And I argue against this. I think I said at the time, it makes sense, but I don't think it's the case. I think what you need is somebody who can make a connection with the voters. And I think Laura has the potential to do that. But I don't think that if the purpose was to kind of try to position the ticket ideologically, I'm just not convinced that works. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. We've obviously had a very contentious race, or at least it showed in the debate between Themis Clarides, who was obviously very well known for her leadership in the House for the Republicans for 11 years. And my sense is that Leora Levy, in that debate, although she lost the debate, she won people for her far right or further right, let's call it less moderate position. And what's interesting in the background of all of these things going on is that Bob Stefanowski, actually in June of this year, donated $5,900 to Levy's campaign. Half of it was for her primary run, and half of it was for her election run, if she won the primary, and $4,000 to LaMarche. Now, they are obviously both, let's call them they're right. They are conservative. They are, well, let's say they accept the Trump ideal of law and order, etc. And having said that, he did not donate any money to Themis, who is more moderate, as is he. So that leaves a question mark. And if that's the case, was he really rooting for the other two? He really wanted to support the other two, or was that some sort of personal issue between them? And if in fact Themis had won, were they going to make a good team, Republican team, if there's an issue between them? And in fact, let's look at her position right now. And she was asked, I think on a couple of different shows, will you support Leora? Pardon me. And Leora has extended her hand to her and said, I hope you do. And will she support Bob? And so there's a bit of a, I don't want to say it's a family feud, but here we are trying to look at a Republican Party pulling itself together in a unified fashion. What's your take on all of that?
Well, it was, let's say, an unusually, and I think unfortunately, bitter contest, more than usual. And I'm sorry that happened. I like all three of these people, and Leora is a excellent woman, and I've known her for quite a while, and I think she's really intelligent, strong, and a very decent person. And she's gotten the press especially has been very hard on her in calling her nasty and pointing to her as being an extremist and flip-flopping. I don't think any of that is fair. I do think that Leora is somebody that had a kind of a conservative wake-up call, maybe especially around social issues over the last few years. And it had to do, I think, in part with her own background and coming from Cuba and concerns about things like critical race theory and so forth, which I share and which I think most people in Connecticut, including Democrats, are concerned about. There's no reason why they can't bury the hatchet. You got to be willing to do it all the time in politics, to say, okay, that battle's behind us. Now we are where we are. And Themis has been around the block. I think she understands that too. As far as Bob's involvement and his contributions, this is completely speculation, but Leora raised a great deal of money for Bob's campaign 4 years ago. And I can't help but think that that was one of the reasons that he felt like he could hardly say no to her, even though she was in a primary. Ditto, I suspect, Peter Lumage. I don't know where Themis was last time. I'm sure she wasn't with Bob. So that could account for it. That's not to say that Bob had it out for Themis, but that rather that he might have felt that he had a debt to Leora and Peter that he didn't have to Themis. I think that, as you said, ideologically, Bob might have been more comfortable with Themis on the ticket. And one challenge that Leora is going to create now for the ticket is that the press is going to try to make this, and the Democrats even more so, but the press will go along with their narrative of, because Leora Levy's on the ballot, implicitly Trump is on the ballot. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of, Bob, how do you feel about Trump? How do you feel about Leora's position on this issue or on that issue? That's a problem, but that's a problem we can get past. And you've got to find a way. You can't avoid controversies in politics, but you can find a way to slip the punch. And that's what Bob's got to do on this. He's got to find a good response, and the response is simple in a way. It's, listen, this election isn't about Donald Trump. It's about the state of Connecticut. And, what I could say what I think of Donald Trump. And I think most Republicans would say this. He did some things I like. He did some things I wasn't so crazy about. He behaves in a way that I'm very uncomfortable with. But, I'm not running away. I'm not running towards him. I'm not running away from him. What I'm trying to do is fix the state of Connecticut. And so he's got to get good at that answer so that he can just answer it and move back to his actual issues. Well,
Benjamin Franklin had a comment, a quote that I like very much. And I think the one thing we can say and would be pretty much agreed to, and of course, anybody who's far left is sure he got a lot undone, but Benjamin Franklin said, better well done than well said. And I
that's right.
So I think this is critical that there are some things that are done between now and the November 9th election, November 8th election, that needs to prove that things will get done. There needs to be a plan. I would like to see Mr. Stefanowski actually detailing things to the solutions of the current problems we have and getting ahead of the curve on that. I would like to see Laura Devlin be working on legislature people, because we're going to need them to back him. Because if Bob wins, he's going to need the legislature on his side to get some of the things accomplished that he looks at as goals and objectives that will fix Connecticut and its economic problems, and quite honestly put people more comfortable. And I think this Donald Trump thing really, I think the icing on the cake was the fact that, yes, his house got raided, and then people started to think, oh my Lord, they could actually come into my house and be ruffling through my wife's underwear. That scares people. And then they start to think about their, are they going to start ruffling through my bank accounts and so forth? And I think that's what put it over the top. And I think that's what, although a poor turnout, I think it was only about 21% on the Republican side, a turnout for voting this time. But I think it could have been worse if that hadn't have happened. So that might actually be a good turn of events. Now, there was one other comment I wanted to make, two things about Themis, and I'm just looking at these things because I'd like to see your viewpoint on it. Bob also turned her down as a contender for his lieutenant governor. And my question to you is, do you think that Themis got off the gubernatorial race and in order to join the U.S. Senate, or do you think that it was recommended, quote unquote, for her to do so?
Well, it's pure speculation on my part, Susan, but I don't mind doing a little speculation. And it's not, if I'm wrong, it's not done I'm not wrong out of malice. I suspect that Themis reached a point where she was looking at polls and saying, I don't know if I can beat Bob in a primary. And at that point, you say, well, is there an alternative? And I think that Bob was anxious, I'm sure, to avoid a primary. And I think Themis's first thought might have been, oh, well, this will be easy. I'll switch over here to the U.S. Senate race. I don't think she anticipated Leora getting into it as well. And so she ended up where she ended up. I think that she saw the handwriting on the wall. She's a smart woman politically. And I think that she figured this was her best bet. So it didn't work out. Things often don't in politics. Sometimes it doesn't. You can make the right move and still it doesn't work, and that may well be what happened to Themis in this case.
With regard to the support for each other, do you see that as critical? One of the things I actually want, when I say support, even former Governor Cuomo, he even did not like the idea of the raid on Trump. And that's now, is that sympathy or empathy or whatever from the Democratic side? Do you think that will relate to any of the Democrats going, wow, that was really bad. I'm not so sure I like what our government is doing.
Oh, on the contrary, when you're talking at least about the Democratic base, I think this was done in some ways to placate them. I think there's a lot of pressure on Garland and on the administration to get Trump, that somehow we got to be able to get him on something. And I think this kind of aggressiveness is one way to say to the base, hey, we're trying, we're doing something pretty radical. That said, and it's concerned me too. We're still waiting to see what the Warren said, and that'll be enlightening. And whether there was the need to take this rather drastic step. And I don't know that the Democrats necessarily anticipated just how drastic it came across as being. The press conference that Garland did after the fact, which obviously wasn't even couldn't call it a press conference. He didn't take any questions. It was 5 minutes. It seemed very reactive and very hasty. Like they thought, gee, this hasn't played out the way we wanted it to play out. So rather defensive. And we'll see. But if really what Cuomo said is what I think an objective person would say, which is, okay, you did this. Now convince us that this was justified. And I think a lot of people would say, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but you got to let us know. And it's very curious that even if they were in conversation with his lawyers about material they were concerned about, usually you keep talking until the thing is either resolved or you have to go the next step legally. In this case, it seems like they just decided to jump. And I can't help but think that, first of all, that there's not after something besides classified materials, because once you go in there, if they find something related to January 6th, that may not be what they went in for, but if it's applicable, they can use it if it's a sign of wrongdoing. And they could have acted along, if they really had a concern, they should have, if it was a big concern, they should have acted months ago. If it's not a big concern, what are you doing this? So.
Yeah, well, I think also there is the uncomfortable feeling that, did they put cameras in his house? Could they have put something in there would make him look guilty in some way? Does he have cameras in his bedroom and in his inventory lockup in his office that would actually take pictures of what they were doing or how they were doing? I also think Garland really missed it when they took too long, or it was Biden who gave the instructions, whichever, or someone else, took too long to say why they were there, explain the warrant, and now they don't even want the warrant out there to see what was in the warrant and was it justified and so forth. And then he came out in the press conference that he did this past week, and he was late by half an hour. It was very short, and basically all it was a defense of he doesn't want his FBI guys to be called bad names as though they were bad characters. And that was pretty much it, and they didn't give us any answers. So what's next?
Right. Yeah, the next is going to be, the thing is people are going to have to find out what this was all about. And the concern is, and it's funny that the FBI, that's talk about a red herring. People aren't mad at FBI agents, rank and file guys that do what they're told to do. People are concerned about the very people that are up there, standing up there. Garland himself, the FBI director, et cetera. Is this politicized? And then you have Biden, who acts like that's the Justice Department. I don't have anything to do with it. It's the executive branch of the government. You can't say that they're not some fourth branch out by themselves. They're part of the executive branch. Biden, the Attorney General, and all these people. And the idea that that Garland, obviously, on one hand, Garland says, I authorized it. And on the other hand, Biden said, I didn't know anything about it. That disconnect between those two people, between the Attorney General and the President, is hard to believe, but I actually believe it in this case. But still, I'd say, well, how the heck didn't Biden know something about it? Wouldn't somebody say before they did something like this that was going to be a big story, hey, Mr. President, this is what we're planning to do?
Sure. All right. Our time has gone on so quickly. Just very briefly, your feeling about the fact that Pat Sasser has been chosen as campaign manager for Bob Stefanowski going forward. Tom Scott did a pretty good job, I mean, considering in 2018, with regard to, Bob did not go to the convention. Bob then petitioned and eventually ended up winning the primary. So Tom Scott apparently was a good supporter back then. How do you see Pat Sasser as being the choice going forward? I know he was the grassroots leader for the tolls issue. Do you see that as the reason for Bob choosing him?
I suppose, and I believe they developed a personal relationship during the mask operation that Bob was involved in at the beginning of the COVID crisis. Tom was very involved with Bob through the primary, not so much afterwards. And I think he did a good job, and he saw the essential strategic decision, which is don't worry about the convention, get the signatures, and jump out to the lead and try to hold it. And really, what Stefanowski did last time was like a horse that, there's horses that go to the lead and try to stay there, and there's horses that hang back and try to come on. Bob was the horse that went to the front, and then it was kind of daring everyone else to catch him. And of course, because he and David Stemmerman had their own non-public funds, they were able to spend early, where Boughton and Herbst and Obsitnik were waiting for the grants to come in and couldn't really start spending money. By the time they did, I think Bob had it wrapped up. That was a very smart strategy. This time, Bob again did exactly the right thing in terms of getting the nomination, which is just start running the day after the election, basically, and make yourself an inevitability. And it worked. And by the time anyone else thought about it, I think Bob again had enough of a lead that they didn't come on. That Pat Sasser, I think, has a background in this grassroots organizing. We'll see if he can put it together. A campaign is a different thing. And I just don't know. I don't know Pat Sasser well enough to assess that. And again, events will determine whether he can pull this together. You always have the problem of saying, do I want someone from Connecticut or do I want someone from out of state? And the problem with getting someone from out of state is obvious, that they don't know Connecticut and they don't have the commitment necessarily. The election's over, the next day they fly back to Virginia or wherever, and that's cash their check and that's the end of it. Somebody from Connecticut is good, but there's a limited amount of talent. And Pat Sasser is a good example of somebody that there's reason to believe he might be able to run a campaign, but he doesn't really have a track record in campaigns.
Sure. Well, our half hour has gone by very quickly. I am so appreciative of your, as always, candid and very rational, I think, objective views on everything. And any contact information you'd like to give, Joe, if people want to reach you?
I can't say that I haven't even been putting out my videos to speak of, okay. And I don't have a website anymore to point to. I have a Facebook page. Right. So anyone who's looking for me can get either on my personal Facebook page, Joe Markley, or there's a Joe Markley on Politics page. And you can follow me there. And also, if you want to subscribe when I do send out a video or whatever, you can reach me there. Hey, thank you for the opportunity. I love talking to you.
Oh, yeah, it goes both ways. And I know we'll have you on again as we progress towards the general election. So I just want to thank all my viewers and my guest, of course, Joe Markley, for today. And please always see all of our programs on ctvalleyviews.com. This is Susan Regan. Thank you for joining me.